If you are having trouble with murderous robots bent on dominating the entire human race, take solace in the fact that there's probably not much you can do about it anyway. This is Vaguely Scientific. We can dance if we want to. We can leave your friends behind because your friends don't dance, and if they don't dance, I am Derek. It's poetry in motion. She turned her tender eyes to me, as deep as any ocean, as sweet as any harmony, but she blinded me with Jim, the scientist. Hi, Jim.
I have a 500 milliwatt laser.
That's scary also.
I mean, they're not like they'll burn through a balloon, and they will detach your retinas, but like...
That's very scary.
Yeah. Just don't point them at your retinas.
And in my mind and in my car, we can't rewind, we've gone too far, pictures came and broke your heart, put the blame on Joe. Hi, Joe.
Hi. I don't have that kind of laser, but I do have a 1,000 megawatt flashlight.
Apparently you can just buy those on Amazon now, the lasers.
I know, and the flashlight.
And that's true, yeah.
Like, literally, you put a piece of paper on this flashlight, it catches fire.
Yeah.
My phone has a flashlight on it.
It's safer than the one I have.
My phone flashlight's better than most of my flashlights.
Yeah.
Well,
it's the future.
It is the future.
It is the future.
Well, since it's the future, we might as well record the show where we answer the most ridiculous audience-submitted questions in a manner that we like to call vaguely scientific. But before we do that, and after that super smooth segue, it's time for the fun science fact of the day. Jim?
Okay. Red king crabs have 208 chromosomes. Although the real takeaway I want you to leave with this is that the number of chromosomes a species has basically nothing to do with how complex or intelligent it is.
So what are they for?
Just storing stuff.
Oh. How many chromosomes do we have?
46.
I knew that.
Yeah, I kind of figured as soon as I said it, I was like, he's going to know this.
I just didn't think about it.
Right.
Yep. 23 pairs.
Oh, yeah. 23 is the number that I remembered, actually. And so.
There was a species of plant, because I looked up, like, what was the thing that had the most chromosomes, and I settled on the red king crab because it was the one that had the most sort of complete chromosomes, because there are a lot of things that have way more, but they're all plants, and they're not what they call diploid. Like, we have two pairs of 23. Some plants have 4 copies or 8 or multiple copies that sort of inflate the number. And then one of the plants I was looking at, it says they have just a fragmented genome where it's just like they have like 15,000 chromosomes, but each one of them does like one job.
Oh, weird.
So I decided not to count that one.
No.
So it's like an efficiency kind of thing.
It's not even really that, because like some of these plants are just normal plants. It's just sort
like
of random.
Your friendly neighborhood fern.
Yeah.
I like ferns.
I do too.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of ferns, question 1 this week has nothing to do with ferns.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay.
I'm doing a segue thing this episode, I guess. Well, question 1 this week comes to us from Jonathan Y. If we assume I could harness static electricity, how many times would I need to be shocked to power my Sith cave, or perhaps something more vaguely scientific like Optimus Prime? Or better yet, how could we use the Easter Bunny to statically charge Optimus Prime? What other unlikely fictional combos exist that would form a great symbiotic statically charged relationship?
I just want to say that I think we should forego using the Easter Bunny to statically charge Optimus Prime and use the Energizer Bunny
to just
That's
power
what
him.
I wrote!
Yeah.
I
Because
agree.
it just keeps going and going and
Yeah.
going.
There was a commercial that had Darth Vader in it, and the Emperor sent Darth Vader to get the Energizer Bunny, and Darth Vader started to like hold his lightsaber out, and it went dead, and he opened the bottom up, and 2 Duracell batteries came out, and he was like, no! It was actually way before he said no at the end of episode 3. So,
what did he do it like more enthusiastically?
He did it more in a way that I would think besuits Darth Vader.
Okay. That's the one thing I remember of episode 3 was how kind of like unsympathetic.
Was.
Like, no, that's a good line read there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll also throw out there, I actually have a theory here.
Okay.
Because it mentions specifically about a Sith cave. So, again, since we're talking Star Wars here, I'm assuming he means Sith as in the Jedi and the Sith. So...
No, I'm pretty sure that I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Okay. My theory is that is why Jedi and Sith both wear those heavy, like, woolen, like, overcoats and cloaks. And so the Sith are just utilizing the static electricity for their force lightning. But the Jedi have to find ways to ground themselves.
Or the Jedi use it to power their telekinesis because they're using, like, you know how when you open a slice of cheese, like American cheese, and the wrapper sticks to things? That's how they're doing their telekinesis, is they're just using electricity.
You know what? That's fair.
And lightsabers are really made of cellophane.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
So the first thing I want to say is there's kind of a few different questions kind of meshed into this submission. Yeah. And I focused mainly on this kind of beginning part because the answer to the first part of this question is pretty simple in theory, but turns out really complicated in practice. So I did a lot of math. And the very first thing is assuming I can harness static electricity. So that was immediately interesting to me. So under most conditions, static electricity, which is the kind that would like give you a shock if you touch a metal doorknob, cannot charge something just on its own. In order to use that, you would need to convert. It's a high voltage and low current electricity. You would need to convert that to low voltage and to like a moderate current for a very long period of time. And this technically can be done, but as far as I've been able to research, the amount of energy you get versus the amount of effort it requires to collect it, this would be done with like a special kind of antenna that you would put to collect static electricity from the atmosphere. You get so little energy that it's just really not worth it.
Yeah.
Honestly, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. And the thing that I thought was interesting was because I was trying to find out, like, how much voltage is in like a static shock, and it's a lot of voltage. Like, some static shocks can have hundreds or thousands of volts per instance, but like when it comes to powering a light bulb, for instance, you need like 120 volts, or really any, like our houses are in America, at least, are designed to handle 120 volt power stuff. Yeah. And, but that's sustained voltage. That's a static shock is over in an instant, unless you have like a machine, like a Van de Graaff generator or like a Wimshurst machine. But yeah, I mean, it's fairly impractical.
And to give that, so like the amount of energy that comes out of a charge is measured by a joule. And we don't really use that word in common conversation all that much. We use volt and watt more often. And so watt is a joule per second is the definition to that, if that is helpful in any way. So in order to feel a static shock, I learned you would need at least 1 millijoule. And 10 to 30 millijoules is enough to like make you flinch. and it would take about 1,350 millijoules to kill you. And so to give you kind of a frame of reference, shuffling your feet across a carpet typically generates around 10 to 25 millijoules, which is just under 2% of a lethal jolt. So converting this to wattage, which was important for the further calculations that I did, I learned that it's actually possible to statically charge a balloon and then place a fluorescent light bulb on it, and there's enough energy, there's enough wattage in that to power a fluorescent light bulb. So I looked up fluorescent light bulbs take about 13 to 15 watts.
Okay.
Which is less than like an incandescent 60-watt light bulb. Mm-hmm. So since we specifically mention Optimus Prime, I looked at vehicles.
Okay.
And I looked at, so a car battery, here's where it got a little more mucky. A car battery is measured in volts. So here's some very basic electrical physics. A volt is the force that sends electrons through a circuit. An amp is the amount of energy in that circuit, which we call the current. And a watt is the rate at which energy travels through a current. So watts are equal to amps times volts. So the average car battery is about 12.6 volts with 105 amps. Mm-hmm. And this would equate to, remember that joules are energy over time. So this would equate to 1,323 watt hours. So for another future calculation, we'll round that, or we'll convert that to kilowatt hours. So it's 1.3 kilowatt hours. Now, and the reason that's important is that Optimus Prime, unlike a car, runs entirely on one kind of energy, whereas a car has a battery and it has a gasoline. So I looked at something like, so it's kind of unknown to me at this point if the Allspark, which powers Optimus Prime, is electricity based. I hope it is.
It is a spark.
It's a spark. So, you know,
it literally has spark in
it. It has
name.
spark. So proof positive right there. So I assume it would take much more than 1,323 watt hours to power Optimus Prime. So I looked up the closest I could get, which is an electric car, which is a Tesla. And on average, Teslas use about 34,000 kilowatt hours per 100,000 miles, or between 102,000 kilowatt hours to 170,000 kilowatt hours for the entire lifespan of the vehicle.
Jeez.
Wow. This is several powers of 10 higher than 13 to 15 watts for a static charge on a balloon.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit there.
So that's the extent of, because at that point I realized this is all me estimating a lot of unknowns. I was like, so this just is not feasible.
Right. Well, the other thing I was thinking about was, like, if you scaled it up to lightning, which is, you know, substantially more powerful, but the problem with that is that it's really hard to harvest lightning because it is like a large amount of electricity, but delivered in one lump sum. So it's going to overwhelm or destroy anything that would be used to harvest it. So, like, that's why we don't really try to capture lightning. We just ground things so that when lightning does strike, it doesn't burn the building down.
Can't catch lightning in a bottle.
Yeah. And kind of with that too, I mean, you look at, a static shock, you're looking at, for voltage, fairly low, like potentially even upwards of, like, there have been some measured in the like 20,000 volt range. But because it actually produces very little current, and it's for an extremely short duration, like for humans, it's completely harmless.
Unless you have like heart problems or a pacemaker or something.
Yeah, exactly. But then you look at lightning bolts, and now all of a sudden you're talking about, again, orders of magnitude difference. Because you're
Right.
literally talking billions with a B of volts.
And granted, it's the same process, but it's still, like you said, order of magnitudes greater.
Yeah.
Yep. And then on top of that, you're looking at, since you brought up amps earlier, with lightning, you're talking, roughly 30,000 amps.
That's too many amps.
It's far too many.
That'll kill someone.
Oh yeah.
That'll kill someone. Even though it is for an instant.
Yeah.
The fact that it produces such a high current in that short amount of time is the problem, I guess you could say. Which actually means lightning would be much better to power Optimus.
Oh yeah.
So
and Frankenstein's monster.
So
Yes.
then you get into the difference between something powering something and something starting something.
True.
Because that's going to be a spark, and the all spark.
Yeah.
Yeah, the all spark.
Yes.
So that's going to give him a jump start. But if Optimus
Which
Prime,
I think we've seen.
we probably have seen that. We've definitely seen that in certain adaptations of Frankenstein.
Yeah, well, obviously.
But so if lightning would strike the starter of Optimus Prime and get him going, that's one thing. But if he actually required that amount of power to sustain his activity, like that's significantly more.
Yeah.
So like constant lightning strikes.
Yeah. I was also thinking about sort of the specific reasons we have certain power sources. Because for some reason, I was looking up different kinds of batteries, and I discovered that like a car battery, like a lead acid battery, is not like the most energy efficient. It doesn't have the most energy stored up inside of it per size. It's kind of an okay battery, but it can really deliver quite a punch when you need to start your car.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the main reason we use them, because a lot of other batteries, they have like sort of a slower startup period, whereas a lead acid battery is just like right out of the gate. It can, deliver that jolt. So with something like static shock or lightning, I mean, you're not really going to get... they're not really compatible with the way we use power.
Right.
Although, can I tell you about something interesting I did find out?
Nah.
Fair enough.
I'm kidding.
Moving on.
Go ahead, Jim.
So I was looking into, it's something called triboelectric generation. And it uses the same kind of premise as like static electricity, where you have friction building up a charge of some sort, two materials coming into contact. And there was this scientist, his name is, let me see, I wrote it down here. His name is Zhang Lin Wang. And he has been creating all kinds of really clever triboelectric generators. And these generate very, very small amounts of electricity, but he's installing them into things that are in motion constantly. So keyboards, every time you click a key, you're generating a very minuscule amount of power that you are then saving in some capacity.
Interesting.
One of the ideas was to install them in road surfaces, because even though roads are solid, as a car goes over them, it depresses the pavement into the ground just a little bit, and then it springs back up. So that would generate a tiny amount of electricity. And if you add up all of the cars on all of the roads in an area, it might generate a fairly decent amount, and any little bit helps. So this triboelectric generation was really interesting, and I felt like it was not really the letter of the question, but it was kind of the spirit of the question. But I mean, it's not going to generate enough to power a house unless you have, like a whole road's worth of cars going at the same time or something like that.
Which admittedly is why those sort of things were being looked at for things like Washington, D.C., New York City, Los Angeles. Which, when you think about it, are places that, while they themselves may not necessarily need that extra energy, they're in areas that do occasionally have energy deficits, which can then get moved around in the power grid.
Yeah, and the grid is a more or less national thing. I mean, there are pockets here and there that are not connected to the overall grid, but if you are generating electricity in Washington D.C., for instance, some of that power may work its way up to Bethesda, Maryland, or like what's like the big city near there? I know Alexandria, Virginia is nearby, so. These can be used for a lot of different things. Oh, another thing they had was floorboards in a house, which I thought was really clever. Especially, I know my floorboards are quite squeaky. They move a lot, so they might generate a lot of power.
So that's really interesting to me because that's essentially how an alternator works, right? Like if in your car you have your battery and then you have an alternator. So while your car is running, this alternator, which is a big wheel, is spinning, which is generating more energy, which can go back into the battery. So it's not perpetual motion, of course, but it's basically recycling the bits of wasted potential energy.
Right. I always thought it was so interesting. In Formula One, they do a lot of like energy harvesting. And so one of the weirder ones that I found out about was brakes could be used to like regenerate batteries and stuff like that. And that was one of the earlier ones I think they did, because they used it for something called the kinetic energy recovery system. And they don't even do that anymore. That's like first gen tech that they've moved well beyond at this point.
I was going to say, because I think that's also the basis for in general regenerative braking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because like my Prius, for example, for those who don't know, I drive.
Right.
Now you can find him.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Find me among the millions of others.
Yeah. You'll get it right eventually.
Exactly. But since it has a battery bank in it, and when I brake, it has a meter and it shows you generating charge.
Oh,
that then
cool.
gets stored.
Well, I remember on like children's bicycles, they used to make, and they probably still do, but I know that they used to, so that's what I'm going to cite. Like a headlight for a bicycle, and instead of having like a battery, you would have what was called a bicycle generator, and it would be this little thing that rubbed up against your wheel. So while you're riding down the road, the wheel is spinning this little gear and feeding power to the headlight, which is the same thing as an alternator, basically.
Yeah, I feel like there are a lot of opportunities for like recovering waste energy. And I think that it just takes sort of the right engineering mindset to look for them. Because like the bicycle thing is such a simple idea,
right?
And I had one of those, and it's actually still on my old bike, but the light was a really old incandescent bulb, like a little Christmas tree bulb, so that burned out years ago. But it's like, it's such a simple idea that it just took one person to be like, oh wait, this is a thing I could actually make.
Just how big of a facility of these bicycle generators need to be surrounding Optimus Prime's headquarters.
Right. The last little bit of the question that I wanted to look into very briefly was just like, what are some other things that you could do with fictional characters? Since the Easter Bunny was mentioned,
right?
Not that the Easter Bunny's fictional or anything.
I just have to throw out there's one rule in this, and you cannot use Static Shock.
Oh no, that was my number 2.
Gonna use Static Shock.
Yes.
My number 1 was Pikachu, because every other episode, Pikachu gets locked in a bell jar and he powers a light bulb. So
I came up with one because most of my research was doing math. But I came up with just one group of 2 people that would be like a good team under these circumstances. So it's not exactly electricity themed, but it's power generation themed. And so I was thinking, so like Superman, right? Yeah. Superman is powered by the sun. And we have established earlier on in the series of this show that genies are suns. So Superman and the genie, and Superman just has to carry around a magic lamp. And he doesn't even need to wish for anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my one cop-out answer.
I will revoke my rule if you guys want to use Static Shock.
Done. I did it.
Because literally it's in his name.
Yeah.
Also, this is me getting on a soapbox for a moment, and I'm sorry. And this might sound controversial, but y'all out there need to put some respect on Static Shock's name. That's all
It's
I'm going to
true.
say. I'm
Does-
off my soapbox.
Who doesn't respect Static Shock?
Apparently DC.
Oh, that's true. But they don't respect anyone, so.
They respect their money makers. And Static
No, they
Shock
don't.
should be one
Yeah,
of them.
no, they don't.
No, they don't.
They respect them enough to keep printing them.
Oh, well, that doesn't count, because they don't print them well.
The fact that we haven't gotten a good Static Shock anything since the 90s is crazy to me.
There were some
I
good.
bet it was the 2000s.
There were
Was it
some
the
good
2000s?
comics. Yeah, we talked about that earlier. All the things we remember from the 90s were actually
Yeah.
from the early 2000s.
It might have been the 2000s. I don't even know. Either
I
way,
don't know.
that cartoon was amazing. The comics behind it are amazing. There need to be more. I apologize for the derailing of this episode.
No, you're fine. I just don't pay attention to movies anymore. So like
That's fair.
I know Static Shock a couple of years ago had a cool reboot. I seem to remember, but I don't remember how long ago it was. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe it was too long ago. So whatever.
It was probably too long
It was
ago.
probably too long ago. I like Static Shock. Static Shock's a great character.
Yeah.
I'll also throw out there as far as since you brought up Superman, I'm also going to put out there. We know that he actually already has done this before, but there's always the Flash.
Yeah.
Because
Sure.
he has his what is it, universal treadmill or something like that.
Right.
Is it Cosmic Treadmill?
Cosmic
Right.
treadmill, thank you. But if you want to call that part cheating and you want to go more in line with the original question, you just put him in a rubber suit in a room full of carpeting
Yep. I
and
feel
just have
like
him run.
that's a very Silver Age idea. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a legit comic that does that.
Probably.
I mean, honestly, it's so silly enough. I would be shocked if it hasn't happened before. But I mean that goes though for any speedster, Quicksilver, the Flash, any of the Flash family, like even Superman, I'm sure has done something similar.
Yeah. Almost certainly.
And then also, if we want to talk about Superman, another thing you could do with him is just have him stand outside. And if you want energy generation, just have him use his laser eyes.
It's just heat beams. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
Just boil some water even. You could do a turbine.
yeah.
The problem is we're not coming up with weird duos. We're just
I know, we're
picking
just-
all the OP
Yeah.
characters and being like, they could just do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what if you jam Pikachu into Optimus Prime and
If he could live in there, which is how Dr. Robotnik powers his robots by stuffing animals in them to generate
That's right.
power.
That's true.
So
He does.
yeah.
that's animal cruelty, but it worked, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, by that argument too, I'll just throw out there, any electric Pokemon and a Gundam,
Yeah. Yeah.
just have them pilot the Gundam.
Yeah.
We should just get a list of electric powered characters and just like put that in the show notes. Here's all the electricity themed characters.
Oh boy,
Right.
those show notes will go for days.
I was just going to take because on Bulbapedia, you can just like say, oh, like electric type, and here's the list of Pokemon.
Ah.
So I was just going to put that in.
and then put Static Shock and Miles Morales in there and you're good.
Yeah. He's a Pokemon.
Yes.
That was my assertion. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Electro. Don't forget Electro.
Well, listeners, let us know what statically charged duos you can come up with. In the meantime, now it's time for
Today in Science History.
Yay! On November 9th, 1934, an American astronomer, planetary scientist, cosmologist, astrophysicist, and astrobiologist by the name of Carl Sagan was born. Although he
Nice.
would not become an astronomer, planetary scientist, cosmologist, astrophysicist, or astrobiologist until years later.
Mm.
In 1980, Sagan co-wrote and narrated the 13-part PBS television series Cosmos: A Personal Voyage, which became the most widely watched series in the history of American public television until 1990. In addition to his work in popularizing astronomy on television, Sagan's contributions were central to the discovery of the high surface temperatures of the planet Venus, learning how greenhouse gases work, and a demonstration of the production of amino acids from basic chemicals by radiation, which came from his research into the possibility of extraterrestrial life. As of 2019, Sagan was the most cited SETI scientist and one of the most cited planetary scientists in the world. There's billions upon billions of other things to learn about him, but for now, happy birthday, Carl Sagan.
Mm-hmm.
Yay.
Yeah. Happy birthday.
So why don't we move on to question 2 this week?
Mm-hmm.
Would a saucer even make a good flying vehicle? I assume this means flying saucers.
I think yes-ish.
Yes.
There are a lot of
Yes.
asterisks.
Agreed.
Okay.
Well, because the thing about really any flying vehicle is that there's one very important thing you have to have, and that's lift.
Sure.
And all you need to have lift is a curved surface. So, like, a piece of, like, a roll of toilet paper can generate lift because it's a curved surface.
Yeah.
And, I mean, if you make your saucer a curved surface, then you can make lift. The problem you're going to run into is that you're going to have your saucer and it's going to have lift, but you can't really do anything with it unless it has some kind of forward momentum.
Yeah.
And a saucer isn't great for steering, so you're going to have to add some kind of fins to it probably to keep it going in a direction. And so it might not look like the traditional flying saucer, but I think you could make it work.
You could make it work. So the idea, a saucer would be good for flying, but because I kind of wrote that down, would it be a good flying vehicle?
Mm-hmm.
Because so my thinking is, so I thought of a Frisbee.
Yeah.
Right? And they're very good at flying through the air, but in order to make that something that you could sit in and not just get completely dizzy and nauseous immediately, it would have to have some kind of stabilized core, which is possible with gyroscopes, I suppose.
Yeah. I was actually thinking about the idea of having, like you said, a stabilized core, and I was thinking about like space stations where you have like and this is not remotely close, I don't think, but you have the space station rotating so it generates its own gravity.
Yep. That's exactly where I was going to go.
So I was thinking if you had a saucer, I don't know how fast you'd have to spin the dang thing to make it fly, but if you had a saucer spinning, then you could make it so that the floor is oriented around sort of the spin axis. So you wouldn't necessarily get dizzy unless it has to spin at like 600 miles an hour, in which case, you know.
So I actually have arguments for both sides of that.
Excellent.
Okay.
So if you're talking about in-atmosphere flight,
I have notes on that.
You are looking at it's going to have to be at a fairly high speed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But to help with that, for the people inside, you would generally have some sort of counter rotation built in. So you would actually have like the outside spinning one direction, the inside's counter rotating, which also then provides stability to it.
And keeps you from getting motion sickness.
Right. But in space, because again, since we're talking flying saucer, I'm picturing we're talking about, you know, if aliens were real and they were coming to Earth and we're seeing
first
these
UFO
things.
sightings.
I think it makes way more sense in space because exactly like Jim had brought up, for generating gravity. Because now you have, you know, that central hub, which is maybe where you have like the cockpit, but then you have your living areas around that outer ring, and so then in space you spin, generate that gravity, and now very much like 2001: A Space Odyssey, you then have portions you can actually walk and like live on. Without the issues that we see of like muscle degradation.
That's really interesting. So let me back up a little bit from there, because the reason that's interesting to me is that some of the things I thought about, like the reason a Frisbee's good at flying through an air atmosphere is because it's aerodynamic. So while that in like the vacuum of space, you don't need aerodynamics to move. So like it's just not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be good for, say, like entering an atmosphere from a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
But I was kind of thinking, but other than that, it seems unnecessary. So what would be the point? And that generation of gravity is a fantastic answer to that question. Also, you mentioned there would be certain parts of it that you could walk on and other parts that just served a mechanical purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at things like, what is the most efficient form of architecture if you have, say, like a docking bay out in space and you don't have to worry about entering and exiting a planet's atmosphere?
Mm-hmm.
And what was proposed by like something like the Borg is a cube.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to manufacture that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also, I mean, this is debatable probably, but it's also like the most efficient use of inside space. Because there aren't going to be like weird corners that you just can't get to. But if you have that room inside of a gravity disk, then that like completely solves that problem.
Yeah. It's actually funny you say that because I just started reading The Expanse, the first book in the Expanse series, and they describe like a warship, one of the Martian warships. It looks basically just like a skyscraper on its side, because it's like it doesn't need to look pretty because it never enters an atmosphere, so it doesn't need to be aerodynamic. It just needs to do its function. And like I'm like a third of the way through the first book, but my impression is that a lot of the things in The Expanse are all form over function, or function over form.
I think about function over form so often when I watch like any sci-fi, like so I like Alien and Aliens quite a bit, and I'm gonna lose a friend right now, but I did not like Promethean, or Prometheus. Was it Prometheus?
Oh, Prometheus,
yeah, Prometheus.
Yeah. I didn't like that movie, but that's not really relevant. I just wanted to say it to make one particular person angry. But there's a ship in Prometheus, and I guess it's referenced in Alien as well, and it kind of looks like a big horseshoe.
Oh, yeah.
And I think of this as like, one, it would fly in space because you don't need to worry about aerodynamics at all.
Right. Anything would fly in space.
But it would be so inefficient if you had to get from one end of that horseshoe to the other end. You have to go through this entire curve. Like, why?
Oh, you want to talk about inefficiencies. I love Star Wars. I love it so much. However, why the heck would you design a warship like the Super Star Destroyer, where it takes hours of travel to go from one end to the other? It makes no sense.
Yeah, the thing about the capital ships in Star Wars is that, and maybe this is my headcanon, but I just sort of assumed that they were designed to bring people like a landing force, like a whole army to a planet and like subjugate it. But in the series, we don't really see that very often.
See that, right?
Yeah, we just see them like in ship-to-ship combat, like especially in Return of the Jedi.
Right, and then actually the capital ships are designed not for bringing necessarily a landing force. They're designed literally to drop mobile bases.
Yeah,
there are actual. I forget the designation because everyone's heard of like the ATST, the AT-AT. There's
the AT-AT.
Yeah, exactly. There is something that has that same sort of designation that is literally, it's a base that you drop from a capital ship onto a planet that then carries multiple AT-ATs and AT-STs and is a mobile stormtrooper base.
Yeah.
And like the Executor, which is we get to see it in Return of the Jedi briefly. It's Darth Vader's capital ship. It's actually the thing that spears into the Death Star. It actually carries like 6 of them. It's never meant to land on a planet. It just sits above that planet and says, "Go do my bidding."
Yeah. Well, so I was reading a little bit about this idea of having essentially an airship carrier, but for spaceships, or being like a space station, I suppose. And I don't think that our space stations are nearly this big, but like a conceivable thing that I'd be okay with if it is this massive ship is supposed to be like an entire civilization or like a city or something. Because then you don't necessarily need anyone to get, like, you would have like police departments and fire brigades like scattered throughout and stuff. But then I have a question, which I legitimately just don't know because I don't know Star Wars very well. But like the Starship Enterprise has a lot of residential area on it, but they also have matter transporters.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a thing in Star Wars? I don't remember.
No.
Not only that, but the Enterprise is tiny compared to a Star Destroyer.
But it's tiny compared to that, but like it is massive compared to any spaceship. We're like,
Well, yeah. The trying to think of a good example. At least within Star Wars, the Enterprise would probably be on the same class as like some of the smaller Mon Cal ships that we see.
So like maybe half a Star Destroyer-ish?
If you're looking, well, I guess also it depends which Enterprise we're talking about here.
Oh, that's fair. I default to the D because I'm a scumbag.
Which
I don't know.
D is the one from Next Generation.
I was about to say.
Oh, that's the one I know then.
Okay, so actually, incidentally, the one from TNG is actually significantly larger than the OG.
That makes sense.
Okay. That's what I'm thinking of because I'm the most familiar with that.
Like you said, it's actually meant to basically have a civilization on it of its own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A small one, admittedly, but it's the crew and their families.
Yeah.
And like plenty of other people to like run the ship that aren't military necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
And it is probably on par with some of the early small Star Destroyers that we see during like the Clone Wars.
Oh, okay.
Victory class and smaller.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try, but those words mean nothing to me.
I mean, fair. I'm trying to remember the Victory class, like the Victory ones had a crew on that was like 1,600 and could carry additionally like another 2,000 people.
Interesting.
And then it had like a cargo capacity of like 8,000 tons.
The thing I can think of from the design of the Star Destroyer and the Enterprise is, and like a lot of these other fictional sci-fi spaceships, is that most of them do kind of look like planes in some way, and that they have like a front and a back. But that kind of makes sense to me in terms of, would they make a good space vehicle because they have thrusters, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And on a saucer, like, would they just have thrusters all over the place, or would they have spinny thrusters, or because that doesn't seem necessary to me.
Yeah.
So at least in space, I imagine you would have actually your main engine pointing out what we would consider the bottom, quote unquote. Because when it's in space, it doesn't matter what direction it's flying.
Yeah.
And you would still need some sort of thruster, or really they'd be closer to like maneuvering jets, which are, instead of like generating thrust through like the combustion of something like we think of, they generally are more generate their thrust by just expelling gases.
Okay.
And I imagine that's how you would generate your spin.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the one thing that maybe they might want to take into consideration, though, is just that when you're going forward, you want, even if there's no drag, like there's not going to be much drag in space, but there are a lot of micrometeors, so you might want to have a small surface area in your thrust direction.
Fair.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there are not a lot of micrometeors, but there are enough that, I mean, you only need to hit one for it to be very bad for you.
I mean, again, unless we're assuming that, now again, here's where we come back to, I'm assuming this is an alien civilization that's utilizing this design, since apparently human engineering is not thinking that direction, at least not yet.
Yeah.
It's possible that just their shielding is good enough to deal with them, or they have some sort of energy shields.
That makes sense.
I mean, you gotta have force fields.
Yeah.
Or, to bring it full circle, it's static electricity.
It's gotta be static electricity. So one of the things that I kind of started looking into in research for this was just, where does the idea of a flying saucer come from? It wasn't much of a surprise, but I found out that it's basically all goes back to like the 40s, and it is with UFO sightings, and it's with what people described as looking a saucer in the sky, and that's interesting to me on a meta level, because it's kind of what we're doing with this question, is we're taking a pre-established structure and figuring out how it could work. And that's like what 50s sci-fi did with just these reports of flying saucers. They just made all these movies and yep, that's what they look like, so let's figure out how that works.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so that was a little fascinating to me, that like, we're just like, that's the claim, that's what we're going with.
Yeah. The other thing that I sort of looked into was, I was trying to find like vehicles that we have manufactured that might sort of fit the bill for like, because we've developed a few different quote unquote flying saucers, but the problem that we always run into is that they don't fly well. So they've predominantly been hovercrafts. They can get a few feet off the ground, and they can, but they're not, I mean, a saucer isn't a great vehicle for that kind of thing anyway, because you can make a hovercraft that looks like a big raft and fit 30 people on it, or you can have a flying saucer that seats one. So, but I also kind of wanted, and this isn't really in the purview of the question, but I was looking at different vehicles that resembled other kinds of UFOs. So, one of the most common types of UFOs that people see are what they call cigar-shaped UFOs. And so they kind of look a lot like blimps or dirigibles, if you will.
Yay.
So things like that. If you've ever seen sort of a side view or a front view of a stealth fighter or a stealth bomber, they look a lot like flying saucers, actually.
Yeah.
Obviously a top or bottom view, not so much, but there are some really high-tech planes that use stealth material that do look like saucers from a profile view. Although, speaking of these various stealth planes and what they call a flying wing, there's also a class of UFO called triangle UFOs that are triangle shaped, and they kind of look like those too. So
interesting.
Well, because I remember, if I remember correctly, rather, around the time of the triangle UFO sightings becoming very popular, was right around the time the U.S. government was testing the SR-71.
Yes.
Which, if you haven't seen it, folks, it's literally a triangle with an elongated front tube.
Yeah, and in a similar vein, anytime there's a new aircraft that is like top secret, stealth, whatever, and they're testing it out at Area 51, suddenly there's an increase in UFO sightings at Area 51.
Yeah. Weird how that happened. The aliens want to come down and see what we're working on. That's what it is. In 1986, there was a Disney movie that came out called Flight of the Navigator, and there's a spaceship, there's a UFO that is crash landed in this movie, and it looks like a big walnut. And when the character gets in to pilot it, it goes into like high speed mode, and it like morphs into like a more triangular like race car shape.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what that made me think of, because it kind of looks like a stealth fighter.
Yeah.
and I just wanted to plug that
Fair.
that movie.
Understandable.
Well, listeners, let us know this week. I think it's pretty obvious what I'm going to ask. How much static electricity would it take to power a flying saucer?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I already did the math for you. Just
Just got to figure out how much energy a flying saucer needs.
yeah, which is the real trick.
Got to call up the zetas.
In the meantime, Jim, do we have any listener mail this week?
We do, and as always, if you want to send us listener mail, you can email us at feedback@vaguelyscientific.com. You can comment on our blog, you can like us on Facebook, you can tweet @vaguelysci. And this email comes to us from a listener named Quartermaster and is in regards to episode 83, Gotta Maintain Those Mouths. And Quartermaster writes, I just listened to the episode where you talked about having multiple mouths for different things. It reminded me of the fact that humans are just donuts with our digestive tract as the hole in the middle. Also, when the tiny embryo ball of cells starts forming said donut, the donut hole forms anus first.
Interesting.
Now, that's true of humans. I think all vertebrates, right, Joe?
I think it's most of them. I'm not going to go so far as to say all, but I'm pretty sure it's most.
I know it's especially true if you're a Taurus.
Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba.
That was my smart joke for the year.
Beautiful.
Jeez. Well, thank you very much for that email. And if you have a question that needs to be answered in a vaguely scientific manner, please email us at questions@vaguelyscientific.com. If you want to get our episodes the minute that they're released, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and all the other great places that cool podcasts like to hang out. And subscribing and leaving feedback really helps us out, and so does telling your friends.
Yeah, they'll find this episode shocking.
Lee good.
I mean, I wouldn't go that far.
Oh,
That's
well, okay. I'm trying to give you the benefit of the doubt.
No, I appreciate it. I don't want to falsely advertise.
Our vaguely musical intro was composed by Anthony Pizzelli, and don't forget to check out our merch store over at vaguelyscientific.threadless.com. You got to keep an eye on our store because there are sales, especially around various holidays. So there might be a sale. I don't know. If there's not, check.
There might be anyway.
Yeah,
We
I should start
won't-
announcing sales on social media, but I don't want to be like pushing merch too hard.
Or
Seems
conversely,
rude.
you need to start doing surprise sales to
Yeah,
reward
true.
those who check it randomly.
Yeah.
I mean, you getting merch from us is just a bonus and a way to show that you appreciate what we do. We're not forcing anybody to
Yeah.
get any merch.
Obviously.
yeah.
Except for skateboards. You got to get the skateboard.
Yeah. Also, old Phil down by the docks, we did force him to buy $30 worth of merch.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
old Phil's good for it, you know.
Yeah.
He likes
He hasn't
it.
paid us for it. We just forced him to get it.
Yeah.
Disclaimer, there is no such person as old Phil down by the docks.
Which is a shame because I've built this headcanon around him now that he's a very charming person.
We'll stick with it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you to Joe for being our guest this week.
Thanks for having me.
Yay! For Vaguely Scientific, I am Derek.
I'm Jim.
I'm Joe.
Take on me, take me on, I'll be gone in a day or two.
Toodaloo!
Wait, old Phil, no, come back.
Oh no! He fell in the sea. He's gone.
He's gone.
He may come
The
back.
canon
someday.
has ended.
Ah.
To be continued.
It's true.
Yeah.
That was like the premise to that song by Jonathan Colton.
Yeah.
I feel like that was the premise to multiple songs by him.
By Jonathan Colton. Yeah.
Yep.
Specifically by Jonathan Colton.
That's a common theme he uses.
Yeah.
All right. Well,